Hello and welcome to another episode of OnReviewCast. I'm your host here, Ash, and this week we're looking at Interview with a Vampire, episode 6 on review.
AMC series Interview with a Vampire, season 1, episode 6.
Yeah, so Interview with a Vampire, episode 6.
3.
And as per usual, we're going to start off with, of course, the episode breakdown courtesy of fandom. This episode is entitled Like Angels Put in Hell by God. It was written by Colleen Albert and directed by Levin Akin. And the air date was November 6, 2022. Synopsis, courtesy of fandom. Lestat attempts to make amends with Louis. The vampire family decides to live together once more. A surprising action from Lestat leads to the family to decide to leave New Orleans once and for all. In Dubai, Malloy has a shocking realization. Yeah, so for the most part, pretty accurate description. It could have been. I don't think that they make the decision to actually leave New Orleans, but more or less Claudia's attempt to leave, I want to say, in this in this episode, and it's thwarted as eventually by Lestat, but definitely gonna get the opportunity or the chance to talk about that later throughout this episode. So, just jumping right into things. Honestly, this episode was definitely slower paced, I think, because we're coming off the heels of Louis being, basically butchered by Lestat, just because he has this increasingly, and he even says it in this episode, he has this increasing fear of being alone. And so sad. And I think I talked about this a little bit earlier in the previous episode, is that they have everybody has some kind of trauma with being a vampire, or that leads into the vampire life. And we get a little bit of insight and a little bit of background from Lestat and how he has essentially been damaged or put into this particular predicament that is the vampire, I suppose. And this episode picks up right off where the last one left, where Louis has fallen to the ground and he's all beaten and bloodied, and his eyes, and he's just swollen. His eyes are swollen, his lips are swollen. He's beaten to all hell, man. He looks like he's taking a beating, but he took a licking, and he's barely taking, but he took a licking. If that makes any sense, honestly. But it picks up right off where the last one ended, and it takes it from the perspective of kind of like, through our perspective, it's kind of like it picks up right where I left off. But what had happened was that after the beating, Lestat had just left, and it has been some time since Louis or Claudia has interacted with him, and Claudia, of course, has been taking care of Louis and trying to rehabilitate him, get him back on his feet, so he could be an upstanding, respectable vampire. If I do say so myself, not quite an English accent. And tell me down in the comments if you somehow enjoy these accents that I do from time to time, and if you have any possible inkling or loving at all. I know we're in Louisiana, but now I decided to do an English accent for the rest of the show. No, I'm kidding. No, but Claudia's just trying to help him get back on his feet. The whole scene with the goat thing, it was about showing that how damaged he was. He couldn't even, hunt a goat for blood, and he's running around the place that they are at, trying to catch and kill this goat, and he simply can't do it. He's so much that he's out of breath. And Claudia's just being his, lovable kind of like daughter, sister, equal thing. And I will say this: I think we've seen this within the show. Definitely, this is I think defined within this episode is that Claudia has now grown up a bit, and I think we've seen it a little bit more with the dynamics of her outside of the family when she went to college and wanted to learn more about vampirism and all these other things. But I think we see it more now, I think, because the maturity within her, she's grown up so much, her mind has grown up so much that the adults, or Louis and Lestat, kind of see her more as equals now. At least that's the kind of vibe that I got from the episode, and that's the kind of vibe that I got from the entire dynamics of how their relationship has changed now, because drastically it went from Claudia being their daughter and them taking care of Claudia, and now it's kind of like Claudia is taking care of Louis, kind of like that full circle kind of thing where the adults take care of the parents, and then eventually when the parents get old, the children take care of the adults. And that turning on a psychological level, we see that kind of in this story as well. I guess that's why the dynamics kind of like changed a little bit too. I think she even actually discusses this, where she's kind of like, I'm not sure. Well, she tells it to Lestat because she's still so very snide with Lestat, even though when they had that meeting and they were trying to make amends, which we'll get to eventually too in more detail. The thing I also want to talk about real quick too is the many gifts I think that Lestat had been trying to give, just basically trying to buy Louis' love to get back into their lives and trying to get them to trust him again and welcome him back into the family. All the many gifts of the books and the cars and the many things to try to distract him from basically saying like, don't forget I beat your ass, or don't forget I fucking like destroyed you that one time, so please forgive me. And I think it's so sad because like you think for a guy that's like over 100 years old, however old Lestat is, that he would realize, or he would understand that you can't buy love, man. You can't buy someone's heart. Like, and it's so true, because like if you try to do that, is it even really love in the first place? If you feel you need to do that, do you know what I mean? Like, and if the person's not, especially it's even worse, like if the person, well, either way it's bad, but it's worse even if like it's kind of like the person isn't being so receptive to the gifts. That should tell you, or be some kind of indication to say that like something's wrong, something is not quite right, and you should question whether it's love at all. And that's what they should be doing. But Lestat continues with these gifts, trying to impress Louis and trying to win his heart back, and Claudia is not having any of it. Claudia is having none of it. She rightfully so shows disdain and anguish, continues to show disdain and anguish for Lestat as he attempts to give Louis all of these gifts. And it's so sad because, like, it kind of, Claudia was the main reason, well, not main reason, but part of the reason why the fight kind of sort of started. But I, at least from my perspective, all I see is the Lestat still selfishly trying to, be a part of Louis' life without any consideration of Claudia, I think. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, and you guys let me know in comments about basically how you felt about it. But I don't think we see throughout the episode, he really isn't. The genuine remorse to some degree, but I don't think he's really sorry for the way that he acted. He's just a terrible, insane brat, like how I mentioned in the latter episode. He's just, man, it's vile, really, the way that how he expects that, just buying these things and doing these things will, make him and Louis basically okay again. And yeah, it's sick. But eventually, I guess one thing that really got to one of the gifts eventually got pierced Louis, very shielded heart at this moment. And so much so that he goes into Antoinette's home. He bursts into Antoinette's home. That scene, man. And he's like, get out. And then she's like, oh, this is my house. And she's like, and he's got like, do I look like I care? I'm wondering, well, I felt like in that moment that, you know, I honestly did feel like, I think that Louis had, I think that Antoinette knew that at this point what they were. I feel like she does know at this point what they are. I think so. Like, she might not fully comprehend it, but I think that she has an idea that, you know, she is dealing with people that necessarily aren't normal to an extent. And to that effect, she's kind of like, yeah, when Louis like, you know, you need to get your stuff and leave, she's like, okay, yeah, like this, but after putting up a little bit of a fight, she's kind of like, yeah, okay, she just gets the fuck out of there because she knows, I think she knows, like, again, she can be like really fucked up if she was like to say no. But yeah, and then Louis and Lestat, you know, share this physically romantic moment with one another, and it's odd because it looks like he was kind of like kicking his ass to an extent, but then they like stabbing him, and they were actually like physically fighting but also making out. I'm not, you know, I'm just gonna say this, and I don't mean the, you know, I'm putting this out there, you know, as the host. I'm a heterosexual male. I've never had any. I don't know what it's like to be not in a non-heterosexual relationship. I don't know how homosexuals in their relationships and how they go about doing romanticizing things, but I just find it kind of odd that while they're making out or while they're, you know, being physically romantic with one another, that they're also beating the shit out of each other. So I don't know. It's kind of like that joke with Dave Chappelle. It's kind of like, is it domestic violence? Or are they just trying to work some shit out? Like, you know what I mean? Like which one is it really? Yeah. And the scene that follows after is just the scene that I think actually is one of the most interesting things I think in this episode, is that we start to get a little bit of background and background information and history on what exactly happened in Lestat's past to make him a vampire in the first place. And I think that was actually iconic because, again, you don't watch it because you're seeing you don't notice it because you're being so engaged within this series that it kind of goes by and you're focused on so many other things. You don't stop and think, at least that's for sure on my first and second watch. You don't stop to think. It's like, well, until like Claudia starts to ask the question. It's like, well, what about Lestat? Like, what about his history? How did he become a vampire? Where is he really from? Like, I mean, like, you know that he has a European accent, but he doesn't even really talk about himself. It's just being focused on Louis. If he's being focused on the interactions with Louis, we don't really know anything that much about Lestat. He's an enigma, like we talked about in the previous episode. And it's only now we start to really get to unravel a little bit of as to who he is, or so we're led to believe anyway. I mean, it could be that, you know, everything that he's saying, everything that he's been saying, everything that he's been revealing to both Claudia and Louis is a lie. It could be. The story he tells about being held captive in a, you know, kind of like dungeon-like scenario of corpses that look like a lot like him. Very unnerving imagery, by the way. And then again, the dialogue in this episode, I will say that it is great. It's a slower paced episode, but the dialogue in this episode is so good. But yeah, he goes back to explaining how essentially these corpses, how he was surrounded by these corpses that look like him, and he's being fed on for like, you know, what it seems like to be weeks or months at a time, and basically abused. And thought that he would become thought that he would essentially become a corpse himself. But instead, he was turned into a vampire, shown some money, and his maker was, committed suicide. So, it's believable. And again, watching this on review, because for spoiler alert for some people who haven't seen it, is just that, this is the story that we're led to believe so far, right? But again, is he telling the truth? And a part of me is kind of like, because we're only one season into the Anne versus universe of Interview with a Vampire. Season 2 is supposed to be coming out, I think, pretty soon. But we're only so deep into this. We only know so much. The question is really like, is he telling the truth? Is he being forthcoming with the truth? Because even at the beginning of the episode, Daniel asks him that all these years in Lestat, he didn't share that he knew how to basically fucking fly. He didn't share that he was Superman. He didn't share that he was Superman. Oh, hell no! You guys remember that from like that? It was the second or third episode. Oh, hell no! Oh, I didn't want. Dating someone, dating anyone. Oh, motherfucker, you could fly. You know how much gas we could have saved. It was like the 1920s, 1930s at this point, but like gas isn't like ridiculous how it is now. But I don't know. The whole thing about him flying again, I think it's weird. It's a weird thing. He's, what's funny though? He flew in the first episode. He did fly in the first episode. It's a weird thing, and I said it was a weird thing from the start. But I guess, again, you're going through this and there's so much material, there's so much things happening that you don't necessarily realize that, you don't necessarily realize that Lestat is essentially, has these abilities or has these extra abilities because you're focused on Louis and how much things is basically going on with Louis. But he did fly in the first episode, so I guess it wasn't necessarily a secret. He flew when he made out with Louis, and from behind, maybe Louis just didn't notice it as he was being, maybe intoxicated by this interaction with this vampire. During this conversation too, where Louis, Lestat, and Claudia sit down to basically talk about welcoming Lestat back into the family. Claudia basically says that, hey, I'm your sister now. You treat me as an equal. I'm not your daughter. I'm not your daddy. I'm your sister. Hey, your sister, or that's the door. You could leave. And considering that everything that she has been put through and he put Louis through. I don't think it's a ridiculous request, but he's still so defiant. Is like, no, I'm not your, my sister. I'm your maker. You call me your maker or something like that. And that's when Claudia kind of fights back a little bit, and he kind of accepts that, okay, this is the way that things are going to be, because he was an abusive asshole, essentially. And honestly, I think no good. We want to believe that he has good intentions and stuff, but realistically, even in watching it in the second part, people like that, abusive people, don't change. Really, that's the truth. They don't change. They can't. They're not capable of it, really. And if they feel the need to be abusive in the relationship in the first place, that should tell you 1,000,001 things, 1,000,001 reasons why this is wrong and it doesn't work. Anyway, so moving on to the next couple of scenes is that we start to see inklings of the town now, because you got to remember again the pacing of this and the timeline of it as well. The town now is becoming a bit suspicious of these people that essentially don't age, and only come out at night and keep to themselves, and have a bunch of people disappearing around them. So obviously, some people are gonna catch on, right? Some people are gonna be like, well, wait a minute, these people are fucking monsters or some shit. And so they start leaving like hex bags and all these raw, you know, witchy things around their place. And me seeing that on review, I'm starting to wonder, you know, if that's going to be that's going to be another supernatural thing that happens within the world of, you know, Anne Rice's Interview with a Vampire. I really wonder because, well, I mean, in almost every new age supernatural thing, they tend to tie in those things together. You know, the witch, the vampire, and the werewolf, the Buffy hybrid trio, Vampire Diaries kind of thing. And if I'm being honest, I don't want them to do that though. Like, this show has been standing so strong with the whole story of the vampire, with the whole story of being true to itself and focusing on the relationship and toils and the trauma and the struggles of being a vampire and transitioning from a vampire to a human. And if they just continue on with the stronger storylines as that, I think the show would be better off. But the fact that I saw those hex bags and stuff and those ritualistic witchy things, I'm hoping that it's just a product of Louisiana, New Orleans, where they're at, where the story takes place at, and not of something foreshadowing to come within this universe of witches being involved in the affairs of vampires. And I mean, I'm not saying like, you know, anything crazy like I'm gonna stop watching the show if they do that. I'm just saying, like, I don't think that it would be. I don't know. I want it to be unique to itself. But if they did do it, and if they do it, I hope that the show's been great so far. I'm sure they're gonna do it to some decent extent. I hope it isn't like too, you know, hokey or anything like that, you know, or anything too weird. Anyway, but yeah. So getting back to the episode, in this episode they do discuss how, you know, compromises in the relationship to make people feel, you know, okay or comfortable with, you know, the nature of what they are and how they are. And they all make the agreement to only feed on humans from now on. So that means like Louis cannot feed on his rats or his cats that he's been eating throughout the show, essentially because he didn't want to kill other humans or what have you. Something that they didn't really focus on throughout the series, that they don't really necessarily focus on throughout the season as well, is that, I mean, the whole idea of, you know, eating preferences and eating, or the catch and feed kind of thing that they do in the Vampire Diaries, or the catch and release thing, they don't really focus on that, because I don't think that I noticed that the morality in their world, I guess, isn't really, they don't really care. They'll kill a motherfucker, they'll kill people. Like, they feeding the people from the person, is most likely they're gonna die. Whereas like in comparison, like in the Vampire Diaries or like any other vampire series, they usually feed on people and then like kind of like release them. And this is even kind of seen in the story that Lestat essentially tells them that's what his master essentially did to him. But again, we don't know if that's true or not, because it just seems like in this universe and in their world, they feed and kill whoever they want and basically essentially do whatever they want. But, you know, despite that, Louis kind of compromises and kind of says that, okay, yeah, you know what, sure, we'll start to only feed on, you know, humans. And Louis agrees to this just to essentially keep the peace, because even Claudia said like she feels like looked down upon for when she doesn't eat humans, when she eats humans, she feels essentially judged like Lestat does. She actually shares that feeling with Lestat, but that kind of doesn't necessarily creates this bonding moment. I guess Lestat tried to create a bonding moment with Claudia, but like through that, it doesn't necessarily do that. Antoinette. I want to switch gears to Antoinette now. Antoinette. Oh boy. So this situation with Antoinette. So here's the thing. When the conditions were set for him to actually come back to the home was that Claudia kind of told us that, like, hey, you got to kill Antoinette. You know, Antoinette's got to go. She's a thing within the relationship that you've been lying about. She's your lover, you know, that you've been involved with, and you're only supposed to be involved with Louis. So you got to go. And he comes in and he hands her a newspaper that essentially has the finger of Antoinette wrapped inside of it, and the story of her essentially jumping to her death or being murdered somehow, essentially by Lestat. And it has a ring on it. And when he passes it to her, he's kind of like, I remember, Claudia, you said that you like souvenirs. And I'm pretty sure this is like synonymous with the Claudia that's actually within the Anne Rice universe. That, I mean, not Anne Rice universe. It was in the Interview with a Vampire universe. The Claudia that has we see in the movies, I think, that was a 1990s or 80s movie. That Claudia is a trophy like vampire. She likes to keep trophies and stuff. So I think that they stay true to that role. And just because like, and then like that, I don't know that for sure. I'm probably gonna, like I said before, I'm probably gonna try to watch the movie at some point, or whatever remnants of the movies that came before this were, because I'm pretty sure they reference that. Truly, they do to some degree. They have to, but something that I just thought that was like so a part of her character was that when she took the ring off of the finger gift that Lestat had given her, and she threw away the finger and she kept the ring, and she was kind of like, oh, like, you know, like pretty, like just like those little things that we like to just bring out her mannerisms and her femininity. I think those are so cool. Those acting chops of her are so cool, and the acting ability of all the cast is really, really cool. But again, she kind of shows it like earlier on too, when they leave these hex bags, these gifts, these little dolls in front of the stoop of their house. Claudia picks it up and she looks at it and she smiles and she kind of pets it and she like kind of walks away. Like, again, those girlish mannerisms and those like very attitudes, somewhat of like that of still like that child like nature of Claudia. I think that's actually pretty cool. I think that that's very, very like it speaks to how well the actor can work with the material that they've been given in the script, but it also shows that, you know, like she's still Claudia. That's very much Claudia, and I could see, you know, in the original version, how a character might be doing that. It's hard to explain kind of like what I mean here, but it was very Claudia like after knowing her for, you know, that previous episode. Yeah, so this is just a very, 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 very information, I think, slower paced episode. Still engaging this to some particular extent, but yeah, definitely slower paced. The whole chess scene and the ending, beginning, the middle and the end of chess scenes, I think thought was actually pretty cool. Yeah, I thought that was chess has always been a game that I know how to play, but I've never really gotten really super like into it with the whole moves. Like I definitely know step one of like how all the pieces move and etc. And that's to almost to the extent of the knowledge of that's almost the extent of the knowledge of what I have for playing chess essentially. But Antoinette, getting back to Antoinette, and get the whole. We'll talk about the chess scene and the chess stuff later. But let's get back to Antoinette. Antoinette and Lestat are still seeing one another after this entire time, and it's so sad because, like, when he makes the promises to basically kill Antoinette and he shows her the finger, proof of her being dying, and him just basically going through all of this effort just to find out that essentially that she's not really dead. So he had to fake her death, take her finger, and present it to Claudia and Louis essentially to say that he's dead. She's dead. And all this work when he could have just actually, I guess, like actually killed her and just kind of try to move on. But it's not move on into a new positive direction with Louis and Claudia, but it's not in a, like I said before, it's not in the, if a person is abusive and if a person is a cheater or all this other stuff, it's just like, it's hard to, I'm not saying that it's not possible for people to change. People can change, but they have to really want to change and they have to choose the choice to change for themselves. And likely this is not usually the case because when they chose to make those decisions in the first place, to actually cheat, to actually go and do the wrong thing, that's a choice that they willingly, consciously make on their own. So yeah, I wasn't necessarily surprised first and second watch on this when it was revealed that she was essentially still alive. Something that did surprise me the first time, at least for sure, was that when they pan over to the side, it's kind of like Claudia and Louis have now found out that this girl is still alive. And Louis even pointed out to Malloy, I think during the interview, is like he wanted her to be found, but it essentially means nothing. That's how strong, because like eventually, like if it's a real, world kind of sort of situation, this would definitely bother anyone within the relationship, but it doesn't bother Lestat. It doesn't bother Louis. Sorry, it doesn't bother Louis because of the sire bond, as we've heard it being referred to so many times in the in other vampire show, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel, and Vampire Diaries, and etc. We've seen these other shows, and that's how it's basically essentially described it. And even Louis explains it to be, a feeling or a bond like a human could never really know, understand, or experience. But I call bullshit on that because Claudia is sire bonded to Lestat as well to some degree, but I mean, she isn't. I guess she's in love with him, and she's making her own decisions for herself, and she makes, and towards the end, which we're also going to really talk about, that she makes a huge decision towards the end, consciously of our own, to even break away or cut ties further with Lestat. But I mean, that's why I say I call it bullshit. He calls it it's because of the sire bond. That's why he lets him back into his life and to the family. But I don't know. I don't really know. I think that this entire time he's being essentially manipulated and he's being kind of brainwashed. That's why seeing Antoinette with Lestat didn't really even shake him. Like, he's kind of like, like whatever. And that's how unhealthily clinged and hinged he is to this man. So much so that, Claudia starts to see it, right? Claudia starts to see it. And it's something that becomes apparent within her that, she has to get away from him because of how unhealthy he is. And she even describes it as like, not all vampires can't be like him. Not all vampires there has to be some kind of different vampires that are out there that are different. I think that she was looking for like genuine vampires that are kind of like her, that are, you know, good and or not particularly abusive to her or her kind. Because she can't necessarily say like, oh, abusive because she doesn't believe in violence or whatever. No, she's a killing machine. She kills people or whatever. But the main issue, the big problem I think she has with Lestat is the way that he treats Louis and the way that he treats her as a, you know, something that is, it's not on par, not equal with him. The abusiveness of that, of being abused, of being in a fight, of being hurt by him. I think that on seeing that violence, I think that that's something that triggered her to say that, you know, we need to essentially get away from this very unhealthy, toxic person. Gen Z loves to use that word, toxic. So toxic, literally toxic. Oh God, yeah. But they didn't really know what that means. Anyway, yeah. So, you know, Claudia tries to get away, and it's, for a moment there, I thought that was so sad. Guys, let me know in the comments what you essentially think and how you feel about that situation overall, about how when, you know, it looked like she was going to make it. It looked like she was going to get away. She was going to go to Prague, Bucharest, all these other places, these fancy places with funny names like Louis explained it. And then Lestat basically busts in the train, and he's like, "Oh hell no! Oh hell no! Oh hell no!" I know. But yeah, yes and no. Lestat does indeed come in, right? The way that they shot that and made that look so cryptic, and how he was playing with the dead corpse of the guy's head, that was so very, again, vampiric, very European vampire essence, vampire energy. Yeah, I think that's the better word for it, really. That vampiric essence, vampiric energy that essentially came out when he bursts into the train car, and he's like, or he's kind of like, tickets please. That was that told a very unique story of what he is and how, you know, European vampires can essentially be. That scene which reminded me of, if you guys seen the Vampire Diaries, it reminded me of the Ripper. You know, vampire Stefan Salvatore of the Vampire Diaries was, before he became docile and more of a chill, relaxed vampire that only fed off of, like, you know, animal blood. Before he did that, he was known as the Ripper, and that whole scene with Klaus and calling him the Ripper, and he's like, kind of like when he had his emotions shut off, something and a writing device that Vampire Diaries actually incorporates, that actually pushes the story and makes it very interesting. It's not seen within the Interview with a Vampire, but definitely within that show. But that's kind of like what it basically reminded me of. And there's a scene in the Vampire Diaries where I think what was his name? The vampire hunter, I can't remember his name, but the vampire hunter Rick, right? The vampire hunter Rick was giving a lecture, and I think the camera cuts away like twice, and I think he tries to call out to one of his students, and his head just basically falls off. Like that. That's what that scene kind of reminded me of. The Ripper, that whole aspect of the Ripper, and apparently, Stefan had done it. Stefan fucking straight up killed that guy, and like that's. That again, it just shows that whole vampiric nature. They play with like dead bodies, and they make kind of like a mockery of them. And he's like, "Check us, please," like that. Very vampiric nature, like I said, very vampiric, kind of like energy, and I love it. I loved it. The dialogue here too, and he has the conversation with Claudia, and that reveal of how he stopped Claudia. It's kind of like, oh, I thought you were leaving, Claudia. When Louis walks into the door, and he's telling her, and Lestat starts to tell him that Poland's being invaded, all this other stuff, and how it's so dangerous out there, and how it's a good thing that this girl came back to us, and that in that moment, I think we all kind of felt, again, let me know in the comments, but I think we all kind of felt like, again, Lestat's fucking crazy. This guy's crazy, and he's a abusive bully that will never let them go, that will always try to kind of claim them as his own and hold on to them no matter what. And Claudia goes into eventually talking about some stuff about like slavery and how he's there being owned by him. And when she starts to talk about it at first, it sounds crazy, but eventually when you start to really think about it, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, we could kind of see the analogy there and how she would definitely come about feeling this way, essentially. And this conversation that Lestat starts to have with Claudia, I think, again, the dialogue in this show is so good, even when it's not highly action-paced or fast-pacing or fast-moving. It's the dialogue, the script itself. It's so well written. So when he finds her in the back cart, he essentially tells her that he can't allow her to leave. Do you know what I mean? Like some sycophant, crazy person. He can't allow her to leave, even though Louis wanted her to go with the best intentions, go ahead and live her life, and and be happy, and send her on her way. And how, again, I'm sorry, I know this is the Interview with the Vampire podcast, the OnReviewCast with the Interview with the Vampire. We're talking about episode 6, but I keep relating this back to the Vampire Diaries of basically that whole vampirism and vampiric, like essentially like nature. When like Claudia is speaking with Lestat, and she's begging him to say, okay, please let me go, please let me go, please don't come after me or try to stop me, and let me go. And Lestat is kind of like, I'm afraid I can't do that. No, not in English. I say, he's like, oh, Claudia, I'm afraid I cannot do that. I like in this European accent. And when he said that, I got just not chills, but like this very familiar like idea of like, yes, this is how vampires essentially are. They're obsessive, and they don't let go of things. Just kind of like a lot like how Klaus was kind of like, I think when Tyler, in the Vampire Diaries, when Tyler was sire bonded to Klaus, and how he was made into a hybrid. I'm pretty sure he was him and some other people were made into, I think, hybrids, and essentially he was sire bonded. I'm just trying to remember Vampire Diaries a little bit, because like it's been such a long time since I've actually seen the show, and I remember certain plot lines, but like I remember definitely that being a thing. When Tyler was sire bonded to Klaus, and he had to essentially do everything that he wanted him to do. I think was even breaking up with like Caroline or whatever it is, and it was just completely fucked up. And it turns out just because like Klaus is fucking jealous of Tyler because he wanted to bang Caroline, which he did once. I think he did. Anyway, yeah. So it just kind of reminded me of like why, and then the whole, I think again another example of that is that like I think when Klaus had these other agents that he was working with, and his brother man, so long, Elijah, right? And his brother Elijah came and he was kind of like, well, like the two vampires came to him for forgiveness, and he was kind of like, okay, I will forgive you. I will forgive you the girl. And then he kills his brother, and he's like, because the girl basically was ensnared to the family, to the Michelsons, and they were kind of like, I feel trapped. Please let us go. Please. There's the sense of that. That's what I felt, essentially, a very, very evil European vampire in that moment. And he's like, I'm afraid I can't allow you to do that. Can't let you leave. And I know, sorry guys, I'm talking about the Vampire Diaries so much. I just love the whole vampire like lore and supernaturalness of things. But yeah, it just that gave me sort of kind of like remnants and chills of what the vampire of what a vampire is basically supposed to be like, and how he's essentially supposed to act. But yeah, it's a very manipulative, controlling move to actually go onto the train where she is, stop her from actually leaving, and bring her back home to New Orleans. You really get to see the psycho, insane nature that is Lestat. And he even talks about, again, like, yeah, he talks about the situation that happened with Bruce and Claudia, because apparently, and in that moment, and guys, tell me if you agree, in that moment, I thought that he was really lying about how because if you remember in the earlier episodes, when he starts to tell Louis about how his ability to, he can't read any of the vampires that he makes, he can't read their minds. And in that moment, when he found out about Bruce, and he started talking about Bruce, I was like, how did you know about Bruce? Can you actually hear their thoughts? Were you lying about that too? Was that a lie? And at first, that's what I thought, but that wasn't the case. What was happening was that he had, apparently, he's just more powerful than he lets on. And when he concentrates, or if he concentrates really hard, he can actually hear the voices of other vampires that are far away. And he looked into the mind of Bruce, and he basically saw what happened between how he basically raped Claudia, and he's been looking for round two. He's been thinking about her, essentially. Disgusting, right? But yeah, it's definitely something that I think that he didn't really, also wasn't very forthcoming with that information. So he had already broken several rules when they had allowed him to come back into their lives. Broke the rule about Antoinette, broke the rule about the live omission. He didn't tell them about basically his abilities to find other vampires and hear other vampires that are basically far away. So Lestat cannot be trusted. He cannot be trusted. And like, that is kind of what the last episode was kind of sort of about. Lestat is insane. That's what I named it. And that's essentially the truth. He is insane. We see just more of inside to come out in this episode as well. But overall, he's crazy. He's a crazy, abusive person. And we even hear when in this dialogue, again, this powerful dialogue between Claudia and Lestat that when he opens the cage of the dog while he's talking to her. He's talking to Claudia. He opens the cage of the dog and he's playing with the dog and telling him that, I cannot let you leave and all this other stuff. And he says the line of, okay, back in your cage, sweetheart. That spoke on so many levels. That spoke on, yes, he's talking to the dog, but he's also inadvertently talking to Claudia as well, letting her know, yeah, it's time to come home, time to go back in your cage. You know what I mean? It's time to get locked off slave, basically. And that was definitely something, some subtext that I didn't actually get on the first go around for sure, but on the second I definitely heard it stand out a little bit more for sure. So he demands basically her to come home, and if he doesn't, what was the line? He says, I'll defile your pocket. I'll do worse than defiling your pocket and driving away on a motorcycle. And I mean, I think that he would make it on his promise because of how fucking crazy he is. And Claudia just sits there and cries because she feels so trapped. And I understand that on a level of everybody hates this, but I think I'm particularly like this. I hate feeling trapped. I hate it. I hate feeling trapped. I hate feeling closed off and in a box. You hate not having options. And that is it's hell. It's torture. Which it should be no surprise as to what happens next, or what Claudius decides to essentially plot next, with the her feeling trapped and enclosed and unable to escape. She basically has a conversation with Louis, this mind-linking conversation, unbeknownst to Lestat, that, hey, we're his slaves. If you don't see this, that we are both owned by this white European gentleman, that's okay, because I think she still kind of understands that he's being blinded by love, and he can't see these things, and it's what it is. That's what it is. It's the blindness of love. It has nothing to do, in my opinion, with the sire bond or with the supernatural connection that's being shared between the maker and the vampire and the maker of the vampire. I don't think so, because that doesn't necessarily make any sense. Because Claudia wants to kill him. Claudia wants to kill him. It doesn't make any sense, because Claudia is saying, hey, you know what, I'm planning on killing him. And the way that they did the dramatic build-up to this, while Claudia is, facing off against him in chess, a game which he taught her to play, essentially. They mentioned that in the episode as well. While that's happening, she's having a conversation with Louis about how we could essentially free ourselves of this slave master, and kill him. And Louis is just warning her not to do this, because Lestat is so much more powerful than Claudia, and he is by several hundred years. Realistically, it's no competition from what I've seen and from what I'm understanding from the show, because he's older and he knows a little bit more and he's more experienced. Claudia would never stand a chance against this motherfucker. Louis had been at this a longer time too, but he got the shit beat out of him, essentially. And now it's just about thinking about leaving Lestat, and now she's going to do a full-on frontal assault towards and attacking Lestat. And I think that this, at this point in watching the series too, or rewatching it, this was a calculative plan that should be done, I guess, and it's the only logical conclusion from this, the only logical conclusion from this scenario or the situation that she's essentially being put into. Because when you feel, or you corner, you trap a creature, I mean, the irrational behaviors of that creature, I mean, can you really, pin that on the creature or the situation that it's essentially being put into? that extreme situation. Think about it. If you think about it that way, that's very, that's just the logical conclusion. So during this chess game, which she basically beats him at, we see the petulant, childlike brat nature of Lestat once more when Claudia basically owns him in chess, and he's like, well, and he realizes this, and he's like, oh, you've won. And he's kind of like, and she kind of like pities him, and she doesn't do the last move just to smite him. That's a very, again, I feel like a very Claudia thing to do, because she's somewhat of a child, but also she's wiser, way smarter than she essentially looks. And she basically, he demands her. He's slamming on the table, yelling at her, saying that finish the last move, make the last move. And Claudia's like, you know what? I'm tired. I'm going to bed. Good night. And it's all in an attempt to piss him off, and it works. It works so beautifully. So very beautifully. Okay, and for the most part, that's essentially the last episode. Except we get a extra scene that seems like to essentially follow in the modern day area, or the somewhat modern day era of, I want to say, 80s, maybe 90s, of actually back to the other storyline of Daniel Malloy. We get to see Daniel Malloy actually in his younger years, when he first meets, because they talk about this a little bit too. I think in the beginning or throughout the series, Daniel Malloy gets to meet Louis Dupont de Loc in a bar. And while he is trying to basically talk to him and have a conversation with him, and how get him to do an interview back at his place, he refers to Rashid, and he talks out and he says, like, is that okay with you? And Rashid is there, and they're both there, and they both look young, which gives the watcher some kind of indication of essentially that Rashid is, despite him being an employee of Louis Dupont de Loc, he's also a potentially an immortal. And something is good because he was young back then. Well, Daniel was young, and we move back to the future. We also can see that Rashid is still young. So the only logical conclusion there, really, realistically, because we've seen the series before, it's on review, is that he's a vampire as well, or he has some kind of ability that it's keeping him young. But essentially, that they've been working together from that long, to that degree. So yeah, and then essentially, Malloy wakes up and he realizes that, hey, he met Rashid as well in that time frame. He met Rashid as well in that time frame, and he realizes that he's still that young. So something else must be going on with him as well. And he remembers all this from after waking up, I think, from a dream. So they kind of paint this in a way where you kind of question, I guess, is this a dream? But yeah, that's the episode. That's essentially what happens with Interview with a Vampire episode 6. Guys, let me know what you thought about this episode. Was it good? Did you like it? I think it was definitely a slower paced episode. I mean, it was okay, but I definitely not one of the hardest hitting episodes. There were definitely some cool things that happened in it. But yeah, before we go, we're definitely going to go the segment of Ash's favorite scenes. Let's see what we got. For number 1, I think one of my favorite first scenes was definitely the when they decide to try to see if they could let Lestat back into the family, so to speak, and he is breaking down essentially what happened with him and his maker, Magnus. And the whole questioning of, was he telling the truth, and is this all the whole entire truth, and is everything else? Again, it's more information. I think that's what those scenes I really like. It's more information into the world of Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire and the Vampire Chronicles, story, and we get to learn a little bit more about that, and try to understand try to understand exactly how this world works, and if he is, on the up and up, if he's going to really change or not. I think that's why it's definitely one of my favorite scenes. Second favorite scene is the reveal of Antoinette. Definitely, for sure. I think when we saw, well, actually, no, I'm going to switch that. No. Definitely second favorite scene is when Claudia is actually found within the cabin with the luggage. When she is found by Lestat. And he has that whole conversation in a deep context dialogue of "Go back in your cage, sweetheart." That just showed it showed acting chops, it showed dialogue chops, it showed so much, and how obsessive and crazy Lestat essentially was. And then lastly, the final chess game between Claudia and Lestat. I thought that was so cool, how he taught a chess, and then she calculatively beat him at his own game. And that's so cool because it actually shows two things: that A, she's relatively smart on a smarter level, and B, she could potentially get away with the murder that she's essentially planning to do. So, yeah. And of course, guys, just like every other episode, we have to get the on-review score from our lovely Linda. Linda, let's hear it. What's the on-review score?
On review, Interview with a Vampire episode 6 receives a 3 out of 5.
Anyway, guys, that's going to do it for me. Thanks so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. Remember to follow us on all of our socials, the Facebook, the Instagram, the Twitter. Definitely, guys, anything you can do to help expand and grow this channel would be a huge help. We are appreciative to any and all Patreon members as well. We are on Patreon as well. And lastly, guys, don't forget, be safe, be kind, be you. Take care.